It sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Really.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. This is... Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
One, they were ghettoized. So Jews were only allowed to live in a specific part of town, and non-Jews generally avoided that part of town because they didn't want to be around Jews. So, in a way, they were self-isolating. Two, they didn't eat pork. Cattle, chicken tend to be generally cleaner creatures than pigs. If you've ever been to a farm that has pigs, you'll notice flies in quantities that you could measure in buckets. Like, literally. Like, if you've ever been to a place that has lots of pigs, you're like, there are buckets
Chickens
of flies
are the same, dude. The chicken crap, flies love.
I mean, I worked and lived on a farm for a long time when I grew up out in Ellicott, and I'm telling you, I've had lots of chickens, and I've been around friends who've had cows. Had pigs. Way worse. So much worse.
Fair enough.
So the fact that they didn't have pigs, which would attract rats, which generally carry the bubonic plague, also protected them from that. So they were self-isolating. Oh, and also, like you said, they have a mikvah culture. So if you don't know, if you're very religious and you're a very religious Jew, you'll use a mikvah, which is sort of like a holy cleansing place where you bathe yourself in water.
Ooh.
So taking showers every couple of weeks was very regular, versus people would go a very, very long time without showers because they believed that, especially taking showers in warm water, was actually considered bad for you because they knew that warm water opened the pores and they thought dirt would get in if you bathed in warm water. So there was a lot of misnomers around bathing at the time. Also, in lots of religious practices, we wash our hands, you pour water over the knuckles 3 times, that type of thing. So generally staying clean just kind of almost accidentally happened just because of avoiding those things. And also, most importantly, and really the biggest factor was the fact that we were ghettoized, was the fact that they were an isolated group.
Stay over there. They're like, yeah, we're fine with that. We're not going to get the plague.
Yeah, but then when they realized that the Jews weren't having the plague, they were like, oh, the plague must be a curse made by the Jews. So then they went into these ghettos and started burning them and getting everybody sick because they were like,
wait. You're telling me the plague wasn't a curse done by the Jews?
No, I didn't say that it wasn't. I'm just saying they figured it out. No, I'm kidding.
That's funny. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to the Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman, and with me is Akiva Miola, as always.
Hello.
And we're about to get going into Franz Liszt Part 4. A few call-outs before we get going on to that, though. Like always, if anybody out there is enjoying the show, we'd ask for your support. I was going to say, I was ask for your something or other on Patreon. And that's just going to be patreon.com/thebiographers. It's pretty minimal at this point, $5-10 if you're able to spare it. Yeah, any support you're able to give would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, that way I can get plastic surgery to make myself sound better on the mic.
I thought you were going to say to make myself look less Jewish. And I was like, dude.
What the? Why would you say that?
I know that I was we were just talking about the plague.
You were just preparing yourself. So you want that secretly. Subliminally, that's what you're asking for.
You know the affection that I have for the Jewish people. You know this.
Honestly, a little too much.
I know, to a point where you're like, okay, guy, calm down.
It's like not every day is Larry David. I don't walk around and I'm like, what is this? What's the deal with? You know?
That's all Jewish people. What is the deal?
It's just 1 million Jerry Seinfelds across the globe. That's how I imagine you like see me get up in the morning. Is like I get up and there's like a baseline as I wake up in the morning, and then I put my slippers on. I'm like, what's the deal with the toothpaste? It's always empty. And then like I drive
what
here.
What the deal with these slippers? No.
That's me in your mind's eye.
I'm just saying that some of my favorite human beings of all time have been Jewish, and it's just made me have a very, very fond spot for the Jewish people. You know this.
I know. I'm just
But anyway, number 2 is if anybody is able to, we're going to be starting our Kickstarter. All I'm waiting on is Akiva to give me some prices and some numbers for some knives that he's potentially wanting to make.
Yes.
So once you get me over those numbers for the knives and everything like that, we're going to be pushing our Kickstarter to be live. And I don't know what will come of that. We might get no funding. We might get, $100. But yeah, so if anybody is able to, you can just go to kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers, and that'll be live soon. I keep saying that. I've been saying that for like 10 episodes now. But it will.
By the time the next recording happens, you will have the numbers and we will make this live.
Perfect. So that I would imagine then will be about mid-September. So I know I said that earlier about August, but yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to
do it. Well, I know all of you have been chomping at the bit to put your savings in there because you know you'll get it back.
Obviously, yes. I know you all are just having thousands of dollars you want to give us, so... Well, you ready to get going here?
Yes, let's get into it.
All right, so let's get going into Franz Liszt Part 4, which feels crazy, by the way. And I've officially decided, by the way, that it is going to be 6 parts.
Okay.
We're at this kind of point. I'm almost finished writing basically everything. This series, I've been just slightly, I don't know about lazy, but it's just like I've been trying to do so much other stuff in between the series, like making TikTok videos and everything, that it's just gotten a little behind me. And then I've also obviously been looking for jobs and stuff, which some of our longtime listeners know. I've been struggling with that for a little while here. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into part 4 of Franz Liszt. Now, last time, we saw the continuing toils of Franz's relationship with Marie de Gault, who had agreed to enter into an open relationship after Franz started fooling around with his groupies. Franz's infidelity had never really stopped throughout the relationship, but started to gain more widespread attention after taking an extended trip to Vienna. His trip to Vienna was aimed at putting on charity concerts to help aid the destitute people of Hungary after a massive wave of flooding caused catastrophic damage. After his charity concerts, Franz started touring around Europe, and while in Leipzig, Germany, he made a new lifelong friend in composer Robert Schumann. Not long after this, Franz attempted to take the English Isles by storm, but was heartbroken and financially wounded after the British newspapers harangued his performances, which resulted in the British public turning their backs on him. Now, where we left off last time, Franz was just about to start up a series of concerts throughout Germany in the winter of 1841, which was about to ignite his career in a way that had never been seen before in a musician. Now, between November of 1841 and January of 1842, Franz would perform some 20 times, with folks attending like King Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia and legendary composer Felix Mendelssohn. And by the way, even if you think you don't know who Mendelssohn is, you do. He wrote the melody for the Christmas classic, Hark the Herald Angels Sing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. No. Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. So that's Mendelssohn. And also, Akiva, this is just for you. Mendelssohn was Jewish.
I was about to say. Also, just going to go on a little tirade here. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Also written by a Jewish person. I'm pretty sure Frosty the Snowman was also written by a Jewish person. Really weird.
I don't know very
why.
Ironic that
Very
it's like
ironic.
These Jewish people are writing these Christmas classics.
Yeah.
Like we have nothing to do with Christmas, but Now, these performances in Germany were apparently something else. Franz had always been a good musician and performer, but these 20 concerts were so stirring and engaging to audiences that people started to go crazy for him. Though Franz was very popular throughout most of the Western world at the time, he was now entering a whole new level of superstardom. It was written at the time, quote, "Liszt was feted. Serenades were performed in his honor. A woman knelt before him and begged to be allowed to kiss his fingertips, while another embraced him in public at one of his recitals, and a third poured the dregs from his teacup into her scent bottle. Hundreds of women wore gloves bearing his likeness. An art dealer prepared glass brooches bearing his likeness and sold them as items of jewelry. Thousands sought to beg or borrow his favors and his money."
Wow.
A woman took his tea and put it into her perfume.
It's literally the bathwater. It's just, he's selling his bathwater at this point.
That's why, like, in the last episode, I was saying, like, yeah, he's about to go into something else. And you were like, I don't know how it could get any bigger. That's the level that it got to. It wasn't just like, oh, we just love him. His concerts are crazy. It was like...
Imagine just like somebody playing really good piano, and then you're just like, you've lost your mind so much where you're like, spit in my mouth.
That's basically it. Like, yeah, I can't imagine ever stealing the remnant, like the backwash of somebody's beer and being like, I need to spray this onto myself to feel closer to them. Like, it's so gross, you know? But that was literally his level of like, people were going completely insane over this guy. Now, Franz had surpassed being a famous musician. He was now a phenomenon. Think like Taylor Swift in the early 2010s. She was very popular, sure, and was winning Grammys and all that. But now, in the 2020s, she's selling out football arenas around the world, and her fans will take you down if you say anything against her.
It's true. It's like what we talked about with Beyonce, you know? Very similar.
Yes, but I would say Taylor Swift is one of the best examples that I can think of in the past 20 or 30 years. In that it's just like, she's past being a musician. Do you know what I'm saying? That's what Franz Liszt had become at this point in time. It wasn't just, oh yeah, he was really popular. It was like, it was a devoted following of people that were just going berserk.
But England was like, whatever.
I know, she's really England was the only country in Europe at the point that was just like, and I don't know, it's hard to say because I would imagine that there were people that were still fans of his, but it really was continental Europe that was.
I wonder if
big.
it was also just a cultural thing where they were like, oh, those other Europeans are so posh and they think they're so fancy with their fancy pianos. And
I would liken it to, now I'm not trying to put down Europe here, but if you ever watch the Eurovision Song Contest, there's something weird about European music that's just like, it doesn't have the same sensibility that like what we now think of as Western music has. And I think the British people have always kind of felt that way in that they write pop tunes, and I don't think at the time Franz Liszt was really writing pop tunes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was a little bit, they called him a parlor trick on the piano, so I think they were looking at it and going, it's complicated.
Technically impressive, but not emotionally driving.
Exactly.
I heard somebody, I was watching Hot Ones with Shalena, and I watched the episode with Ariana Grande. We have sort of just this weird appreciation / just, she kind of creeps us out a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you saw that interview, but she was completely unfazed by the wings, and is just one of those people who's just not like a real person. But somebody mentioned to her, the conversation came up, which is, does really incredible vocals make a musician seem disingenuous? And I would say to some extent, there is a bit of that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
If you've ever watched, we just recently watched the movie Juno, the Moldy Peaches who sing all the songs in that, they are hardly even singing.
Oh,
but
I know.
I feel like pull a much more emotionally charged sort of value to their songs as opposed to that top pop singer or something like that. So maybe that's sort of what we have with Franz Liszt, where you have something like Moonlight Sonata by Chopin, which is
Beethoven.
Oh, Beethoven. Sorry. Which is very emotionally compelling and can be played in a not easy but simple way, as opposed to what we listened to with Franz Liszt in the last episode, which was just so technically wild that maybe you can see it as a parlor trick.
Yes.
Because it's just so technically impressive.
But I will add that this episode is going to have probably more music than any of the other episodes. And we're going to get there in a few minutes, maybe 20 minutes from now or some odd. But I will say that some of these ones that I'm going to be playing, you're going to hear and you're going to go, how was this not a hit in the UK?
Yeah.
Because it's not that technical berserk kind of thing. It's just awesome. It's just good music, So anyways, we'll get there in a few minutes. Now, I just made the comparison to Taylor Swift, but if I was to compare Franz to a band, there really is no other comparison to make but the Beatles. So much so that a new term was created to describe the hysteria that surrounded him, which was, of course, Lisztomania. And we've said this a couple times before, but if anybody's ever heard the song by Phoenix, Lisztomania, that is where the term comes from. It's from Franz Liszt. That being said, too, I recently read through the lyrics of Lisztomania. I cannot make sense of them. It's like they don't...
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't feel like anything, and it doesn't feel like they're actually talking about Franz Liszt, but that's musical interpretation for you, so I don't know. Baronesses and noblewomen were reported to pull each other's hair out while fighting for a glass of water that Franz had been drinking out of, or obtain the butt end of a cigar that he had been smoking. And this isn't rumor. This happened. A popular Berlin magazine called Berlin as It Is and As It Drinks devoted an entire issue to him. He was given the honorary title of Kapellmeister by the town of Weimar in Germany, which is a type of honorary doctorate. So he was now technically Dr. Franz Liszt.
Wow.
Girls were going so insane over him that some even speculated that there was a new virus going around that caused mass hysteria in women. Which is like so sexist, but...
It is. We'll talk about them in the next biography that we do.
It was like early fans of Justin Bieber or the Backstreet Boys or Michael Jackson. He could barely make it down the street without mobs of fans screaming at him, begging for an autograph or trying to tear away a piece of his clothing. Others thought all of it was too good to be true and that all of his adoring fans were paid actors and that Lisztomania was all a big scam. Like... I hate to make the comparison again, but like a lot of people are with Taylor Swift where they're like, what's going on? Because I can't figure this out. And it feels like, is she just like doing something to these people?
Is there something in the water?
Like, right. That's kind of what was happening.
To a non-Taylor Swift fan, it definitely feels that way where you're like, I don't understand. I've listened to her music. It's pop music. It's not. Yeah. Why are you screaming? Why are you yelling?
and that is to say, like, I'm sorry, all Taylor Swift fans out there. It's not personally my thing, but I have nothing against her. I don't like hate her or anything like that. It's just like not my style of music.
But we don't understand the hype. I think that's fair to say.
Yes. Again, it is one of those where it's like people are, look, back in the day, this is a little bit before your time, Akiva, but it's like the same could have been said about NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys.
Yeah.
Where the girls were going so crazy over it. They had some good tunes. Don't get me wrong. Now, these days, I'll get down on Bye 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 and all that kind of stuff. But at the time, I think adults were looking at it going, what is this? Why are you going so crazy over this? So I think generationally, this happens where people will go crazy over these new musicians. And the older,
you're young and you're emotionally charged too. We were just talking about this with your nephew where he was talking about, he was like, music is my life now. And I was like, I remember that time when I was 14 and 15 and I would just listen to a song by like 21 Pilots, who I don't listen to anymore. And I would just bawl my eyes out in my room. Yeah. Or this is a hit for anybody who is my exact age bracket. If you had an Xbox 360, it had the media player that would do like the psychedelic, tie-dye sort of pattern as it played music, and I had a Billy Joel CD that I would play in my Xbox, and I would just sit in my room all sad,
Oh, I used to do that too, and that's why when my nephew said it too, he's like, music is pretty much my life. I responded and was like, enjoy it, man. Have fun. Get into music. Like,
moment
it's
when
great.
you cry at every sad song.
Totally, man.
Dance at every happy one.
It's
and
great.
There's definitely tons of that with Franz Liszt with these young baronesses.
Right, and that's why I don't really
drinking water.
I don't make fun of it because it's like I get it. I've been there. I know that feeling.
Exactly.
So again, no hard feelings towards any of this stuff. Now, it wasn't a scam, of course, but how did he do it? What made him so different from other great musicians? The simple answer here, once again, is showmanship. Now, when I titled the first episode of this series, The World's First Rock Star, I wasn't just talking about Franz Liszt's popularity, his wealth, his lifestyle, or his good looks. I was also talking about what he was able to bring out of people when he performed. When Franz took the stage, he always had a presence to him, but now he had perfected his art. He was an absolute spectacle on stage, stealing glances at the audience while playing, winking at girls as he did so, shouting with oddly sexual passion while fervently playing his piano, standing up and raising his arms to the crowd when he finished one of his pieces, blowing kisses and bowing audaciously, and charismatically addressing the audience in his cool and distinct clothing. He was like Mick Jagger, Madonna, Ozzy Osbourne, Prince, Cher, or Bruno Mars, able to capture the crowd not just because he was a good musician, but because he knew how to put on a show and captivate an audience. I would argue that none of the pop stars that I just listed, no pun intended, would not exist if not for Franz Liszt.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. And of course, all the other taboos of rock stardom followed, like mass crowds gathering to see him arrive in town and wave him farewell when he left. His groupies were as stereotypical then as they would later become in the 1970s or 80s. They would sneak into his room, take off all their clothes, hop into his bed, and then just wait for him to come back.
Wow. Jeez. Okay, so we're fully at the throwing bras sort of point.
Yes, like that's why I said like the world's first rock star. Imagine this is in the 1840s, dude.
What I love about the 1800s, and I'm reading another biography, which we'll do later, is everybody is like, I'm straight and monogamous, but if you get into any 1800s thing, it's like half of y'all are gay, most of y'all are polyamorous, all of y'all are cheating on everybody. No one is the facade that they say they are. If you get into the history of, I can't think of a single person that I've read at this time period who doesn't behave this way to some extent. Obviously, Franz Liszt is an extreme, crazy extreme, because he's a rock star. But even just people out and about in town, they'll go to church, they will fight other people for not being the right type of Christian or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're like, oh, yes, Mary, she's, I just write letters to her sometimes. She's just my friend. Yeah. You know, that's funny.
It makes me think of, and if you haven't seen the movie yet, it's called The Holdovers. It's got Paul Giamatti. Just came out last year, I want to say. I loved it. It was one of my favorite films of the year. But there's a point where Paul Giamatti, he's a teacher at a private school, and he takes this student to an art museum. And the kid, as they're walking around looking at this Roman pottery, and the kid goes, this is boring. Are we going to leave? And Paul Giamatti says, oh, it's boring, huh? Look at that vase over there. Go take a look at that one. And it does a little close-up view of this vase, and it's two people having sex on a Roman vase. And he goes, whoa! and I'm paraphrasing, but Paul Giamatti says something to the effect of, every form of human depravity that you think is a modern invention, I can assure you was not.
Yep.
And so it's one of those interesting things. And one of the reasons I love doing this show is that it reminds me constantly that, yes, humanity has changed in many ways for the better, but it's also been the same for forever.
Yeah.
People have been the same. They've had the same
thoughts and urges. If there's a hot musician who's playing some awesome piano stuff and you're a young lady, maybe you'll sneak backstage. Maybe you'll go inside of his hotel room and maybe you'll see if you can seduce him for the night.
It wasn't the invention of the electric guitar that made that happen. This has been going on for forever.
I think that's the point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
It wasn't the electric guitar. It wasn't rock and roll music or jazz or anything like that. No. It was, I like this. He's hot. Let's bone.
Yes, correct.
That has been happening since the Ice Age.
Yes, completely. And it's just one of those funny things to learn more and more about. Now, some of these groupies, by the way, just like Marie de Gault in the past, even took to disguising themselves as men to sneak past his security detail. Many of Franz's groupies even followed him from city to city, catching his show and then hopping into his bed for the night. Seriously, think about this for a second. If I replaced the name Franz Liszt with, say, Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin, you would swear I was telling you a story from 1975. But again, this was 1842.
Yeah.
But one thing to note is that Franz was always incredibly generous. You might think he would be rolling in cash at this point, but not only did he send loads of his money back to Paris to support his kids and his mother, he was also known to forego his concert fees and instead donate all the proceeds to charity.
That's kind of cool.
Pretty rad, man. Pretty darn cool. But now that Franz's superstardom had reached a fever pitch and his gala of ladies had graduated from gaggle to swarm, Marie again got jealous and threatened to, again, end their relationship. In order to keep things going, Franz made the thin promise to her that he would, in 1844, give up his life as a musician and retire in seclusion with her. But spoiler alert, this did not happen.
Yeah. I was about to say, there's too much momentum at this point.
Yeah. Now, the two would continue to get together for little holiday getaways, but as Franz continued to put on concerts around Europe between 1843 and 1844, their relationship continued to dissolve. The final straw for Marie came in early 1844, when rumors of a scandalous affair between Franz and a woman known as Lola Montez began to surface. Now, the story of this scandal isn't really worth your time, I'll just be honest with you. But just know, Lola Montez was known to be a bit of a high-class grifter, so people thought Franz was being taken for a ride. Now, Marie felt humiliated by the scandal and finally made the decision to leave Franz once and for all. But I do have to say that from all I have read about Marie, which is quite a lot, she was kind of a piece of shit.
Yeah?
She was self-entitled, self-centered, greedy, and frankly, a bad mother. Throughout her life, she never contributed a penny to her children's welfare, even after her mother died and she received a massive inheritance.
Jeez.
Not $1. She even wrote an entire novel called Nelida in 1844, which was actually published in 1846. It was basically an attempted takedown of Franz, where she described him as, quote, artistically impotent.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's pretty shitty.
Pretty cruel.
You know, maybe having an expose about his affairs and stuff like that, maybe that's founded, but artistically impotent is not necessarily true.
And that's kind of a thing throughout their entire relationship. She was never encouraging towards his compositions. She loved that he would perform and that he was successful and all this kind of stuff. But when he'd like write something, she'd be like,
oh, babe, nice.
Yeah, cool. Good job. Whatever. And like, that was kind of it. Like she didn't really push him towards anything to that nature. Now, it also seemed that Franz had had enough of Marie's shit too, as when they officially broke up, he wrote her a letter saying that he didn't want to see her, write to her, or speak to her again if he could help it. In the course of their separation, Marie tried to take her children, but remember, Marie had no legal right to them.
Jeez.
And thankfully, in my opinion, due to the laws at the time that were in place, so Franz arranged for their oldest daughter, Blandine, to go off to boarding school, while the younger two, Cosima and Daniel, remain with his mother, Anna. To this, Marie acted kind of like the piece of shit that she was by saying to Franz, quote, "From now on, your daughters no longer have a mother. One day your daughters will perhaps ask you where their mother is, and you will answer that you did not want them to have one."
Wow.
So she's putting it basically all back on Franz.
Guilt tripping. Honestly, okay, to be fair, Franz's story is so cool, but neither of these people deserve to have children.
I agree. I do.
Neither of them do, because Franz isn't exactly the I'm going to make eggs for breakfast sort of dad, and Marie is not really there at all either, and seems to only want to be the mother of the children when it's convenient, and it gives her leverage to have access to Franz. And Franz is also kind of a piece of shit too. Like,
you're right.
Neither of them should have kids, and I'm glad that the kids are going to be raised by Franz's mother, low key.
Oh, I am completely too, because Anna Liszt was a very seemingly sweet lady who really loved her
by all
children,
accounts,
or grandchildren, I should say. Now, this whole thing that Marie said of, you'll have to tell them that you didn't want them to have a mother, I personally find hilarious, because Marie was barely a mother to begin with. Either way, though, Marie would not see any of her children for another 6 years.
I was about to say, that probably already happened when she was, quote, their mother, because weren't the kids raised by like a wet nurse for like a bajillion years before that?
Yeah, they didn't see them a whole lot to begin with.
Okay.
And kind of to your point, what you were just kind of going over, not to give too much credit to Franz, he was hardly a father either, as he barely saw any of his kids, missed all of their important events of their childhood, like their first communion, and all of them would later say that he was somewhat invisible to them, despite all of them being desperate to have a relationship with him.
Yeah, that checks out. Also, another classic rock star situation.
Yeah. kind of. I hate to say it,
Like
but
the Marleys.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that where it's like, I mean, you can even look at John Lennon's first son, Julian Lennon. I don't know if you know this, but the song Hey Jude, when Paul wrote it, it was actually initially called Hey Jules, and it was about Julian. And so he's basically saying, hey, Jules, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. The whole song was him saying like, yeah, John has neglected you your whole life, but you can be better. That's what Hey Jude is about. So I hate to say it, but it is a sort of stereotypical rock star kind of childhood for these poor kids, you know. So again, both of them, I'm not saying that like Marie was, you know, just the worst and Franz was great, but by no means. They were both pretty bad. But at the very least, Franz was trying to support them financially throughout this time and, you know, put them into boarding school and then giving them a loving home with his mother. And so that's the credit that I will give, right?
Yeah. In all the classic paternal ways, he's bringing home the bacon, making sure they're going to school.
Exactly. Now, throughout all this drama with Marie, Franz continued to grow in his fame, touring throughout Europe for the next 6 or so years and putting on concerts for crazed fans. But late in January of 1847, while in Kiev, or Kiev as a lot of our American listeners will know it as, a now 35-year-old Franz would meet the second great love of his life. Her name was Princess Carolina von Wittgenstein, which is the best name to say.
Yeah, that is great.
And like Marie before her, she too was married at the time of her and Franz's first acquaintance.
This dude, I can't.
I know, dude. But unlike Marie, she was actually 7 years younger than Franz. Now, though Carolina was of Polish descent, she was born in modern-day Ukraine and was married to Prince Nicholas Wittgenstein of Prussia. Carolina was born to an intensely wealthy family whose estate was said to be so vast that they employed some 30,000 people to oversee and tend to their lands.
What?
Can you even fathom that?
I cannot. That is a small town. A small town to attend to their land.
Just her family's lands.
I don't
30,000 people were employed.
Wow.
Now, when she was 17, her father arranged her marriage to Prince Nicholas, but Carolina refused. Not just once, but 3 different times. And apparently, her father literally beat her into submission after the 3rd rejection.
Jeez.
Yeah. She was so outwardly against her marriage that her father even struck her across the face on her wedding day in the middle of her wedding ceremony in front of hundreds of guests.
That's great.
Brutal, dude. That is one of the worst things I've heard. Ever.
Even thinking about it from a political standpoint, what political power do you add to this, knowing that the person that you're giving this your daughter to knows that she hates you? What benefit?
It made her a princess. It literally, she was marrying a prince, so it made her a princess. And so for her dad, he was like, no, this is good for the family. You will obey me. That was basically the sentiment.
It's wild.
It's so crappy. Now, to say that Carolina didn't want to marry Prince Nicholas is an understatement. But her father's public cruelty actually ended up playing to her favor later, as Catholic law states that any marriage entered into as a result of fear or force could be rendered null and void. So she could cite this incident in the event that she wanted a divorce. And not surprisingly, a few years later, they separated with plans to divorce.
Gotcha.
Happily for Carolina, in 1844, her father, Peter Ivanowski, had a stroke and died in the middle of Catholic Mass.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
Adds up.
Totally adds up. That's poetic justice right there.
So Carolina received a massive inheritance and was now sitting as one of the wealthiest women in Russia. A few years after this, Carolina was attending a concert performance of the hottest piano player in the world, and after hearing Franz was donating all his concert proceeds to charity, she also made a charitable contribution to the cause, which prompted their meeting. The next day, Franz was invited to stay at her massive villa, and stay he did for 10 full days. Though Franz probably would have liked to stay longer, music duty called, so he hit the road once more to perform. But Franz and Carolina kept in touch and agreed to spend the fall of 1847 at her villa. Not only was this to mark the beginning of Franz Liszt's last great love, but also the final performances that he would give as a touring piano-playing rock god. Lisztomania had lasted for 7 years, and he was now 35 years old.
Yeah.
Now, apparently, Carolina wasn't much of a looker, which was probably only exacerbated by her choices in clothing, which were said to be odd. She was also said to be very fond of gaudy hats, which were not in fashion at the time, but she didn't care what people thought and wore them anyways.
Just like you.
I'm with Carolina on this. Fuck all of you. I love my hats.
It was right there. Did you write that in the script?
I literally wrote that in the script.
I like how you predicted my response.
She was also said to be very excitable when she spoke, and she would enthusiastically talk for hours on end, hardly letting people get a word in. Personally, the more that I read about her, the more that I think I might have been Carolina in a past life.
I was about to say. Hell yeah. That's so funny.
As a result of all of this, people were unkind, made fun of Franz behind his back, and cast aspersions that he was only with her for her money. But as we saw with Marie de Gault, Franz was most attracted to her mind. Yes, Marie was said to be gorgeous, but that's not why Franz fell in love with her. He fell in love with her intellect and personality, at least initially. Carolina was said to be absolutely brilliant, which makes sense as she was known to spend about 90% of her time tucked away in her library reading. And unlike Marie, Carolina actually loved Franz's artistic abilities, especially his compositions, and was known to encourage and praise him when he shared his music with her. Franz even later wrote, quote, "Princess Wittgenstein is very beautiful in terms of that significant and indestructible beauty that the rays of the soul are alone capable of giving to every detail of a living organism."
Wow.
Isn't that sweet? So he's basically like, her soul is so beautiful.
When's someone going to say that shit to me?
I know.
Damn.
It's like, again, he's like a poet when he writes.
He really is.
I love how he writes.
Yeah. I love the fact that it's intellect and the fact that somebody cares, that he cares more about. I totally get that. There have been plenty of relationships where I've been attracted to that person, but I'm like, you don't care. You don't care about anything. That's not fun.
Yeah.
It's so much more important that somebody cares than their actual looks.
No, I would imagine that every single person out there can relate to this when you say, like, there are certain times, and it can go both ways, where you can see somebody and you initially think they're very, very beautiful, and then you get to know them and they suck. And then it's like weird because quickly you're like, God, why did I ever think you were attractive? It's like you've gotten uglier and I don't know why.
Yes.
But then it can go in the opposite direction where you meet somebody that you go like, they're whatever. And then you get to know them and they're so amazing that you're like, God, I never saw it before.
Now
but
I can't
you're
stop
actually
thinking about
pretty
you.
hot.
Exactly.
Like it happens, right? So that was exactly how Franz Liszt was. He was like, I mean, and I think it also helped that he had so many babes after him all the time that like, he was like, yeah,
somebody had to kind of stand out because he was somewhat desensitized to feminine beauty.
Yeah, exactly. He was just like, yeah, I mean, I can have hot women, but I want somebody whose brain I love. You know what I mean? And
totally.
That was Carolina von Wittgenstein.
Son Wittgenstein. That's so good.
It's a fun one to say. Now, by January of 1848, Carolina asked the Catholic Church to annul her marriage, and the couple decided to relocate, settling together in the town of Weimar in Germany, in a lavish villa known as the Altenburg. The Altenburg was a lavish villa that sat on the hillside above the town of Weimar and functioned almost as a community home where artists from all over the world came to stay and inspire one another with shared ideas. Franz invited many pupils, musicians, and artists to stay, like his old pals Hector Berlioz and Robert Schumann. There were musical instruments everywhere, and all residents were encouraged to play, chat, and philosophize together like one big intellectual family.
I love that. I love that idea.
Isn't that cool? Throughout this period of Franz's life, Carolina was known to be at his side almost constantly, as Franz was apparently pretty ADHD when it came to writing music and couldn't sit still for long. So Carolina was there to keep him on track and away from the booze.
That's good.
If you recall, I said it in the last episode, that was his big weakness. He wasn't necessarily a druggie, but he was pretty much an alcoholic. He just was constantly drinking. So she was there to be like, yo, put down the glass, write the music, man. Focus on the music. That was basically her job. It was here that Franz would live, work, and instruct students for the next 12 years. During his time at the Altenburg, Franz started working on a new idea for music that would shape music into the art form that we know today. Undoubtedly inspired years earlier by Hector Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, Franz started to get the idea that poetry and music should be combined, with the end result being known as a symphonic poem. The idea was basically to break away from the traditional ways of composing music, like a symphony, a sonata, or a concerto, and rather compress those ideas into something that reflected the soul of a poetic idea. Famously, Franz wrote symphonic poems for Hamlet and Ophelia, based on the characters of Shakespeare.
I see.
For Hamlet, the melody does not resolve and sounds dissonant, reflecting the inner turmoil of Hamlet's character, while Ophelia's melody is tranquil, and the melody resolves beautifully like you're dipping your feet into a warm bath. Franz also wrote symphonic poems for Faust, Orpheus, Prometheus, and Dante's Inferno, among many others. Unlike traditional compositions, these poems were much shorter in form, and in many ways would later evolve into what we would now simply call a song.
I was just about to say, it reminds me of in Mel Brooks's History of the World, where he's like, I coalesce the very vapors of human existence into, and he's just talking about comedy.
Yep.
A symphonic poem, I'm like, isn't this just chorus, line, verse? We have a song now.
Yep.
That totally makes sense.
Yep.
And it fits the mode and the theme that we've been kind of running around, which is he's a pop star, he's a rock star.
Yep.
Of course, he's not going to be playing concertos and stuff like that. I feel like this suits his audience a little bit better too.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it all got to this point, is that I think he, through those years of the insanity of playing these pieces, he started to distill what audiences responded to, right? Where he would play certain times and certain pieces, or he would, take a piece by Beethoven, and it was normally an 8-minute piece, and he would play it in 3 minutes, and he would go, that's all they want.
Yeah.
Right? It was like, I don't know if you kind of know this, but like with Tom Petty, his whole thing that made him big is that he was like, why do a whole song if everybody just wants the chorus? Make the whole song the chorus. That was kind of Tom Petty's thing. So like when you hear American Girl, you're kind of like, yeah, the whole freaking song because it's all chorus, basically.
It's true.
Like that's the whole concept of it. So Franz Liszt kind of did the same thing where he was like, they don't want a concerto. They want a song.
Yeah.
And that was kind of it, is that he was
That's
like,
so
we can kind
cool.
of distill this down into something more accessible.
And it's just really weird to think that the concept of a song wasn't really fleshed out for all of human history. Because I was recently listening to some old 1400 stuff when I was working on Da Vinci, listening to 1400s Italian lyre music, stuff that Da Vinci would have been playing. And it meanders. It doesn't have that feeling like a song does. And then you get to concertos, and they have structure, but the structure of a novel, sort of.
Yes.
Where you have the beginning and the climb, and then sort of the come down afterwards. And now the song is sort of born, but it feels weird because now that we listen to songs all the time, it just feels like a very inherent and natural thing, but it's not. That's so cool.
And I am going to play you an example in just a second here so that you kind of know what I'm talking about, but give me a second to explain. Now, one of the best examples of this new innovation is in a piece that Franz titled Liebstrom. And I apologize to my German listeners if I'm butchering that pronunciation. I'm trying my best. But in German, Liebstrom means dreams of love, which was inspired by a piece of poetry called O lieb, solang du lieben kannst, which in English means O love, as long as love you can, by Ferdinand Freiligrath. I'm trying my best with these names here, everybody.
Just run through them.
Ferdinand Freiligrath. I'm pretty sure I'm doing that. But anyway, again, apologies to my German listeners. Now, I'm going to play you a clip, but I would encourage everyone to listen to the whole song, as it's one of those weird things where you hear it and go, I know this. How do I know this? This feels so familiar. You probably don't know it, but the structure and feeling of it have been replicated and reimagined thousands of times in popular music, which makes the piece feel like an old favorite. Does that makes me emotional? I don't know about you.
It really does. It sounds like the blueprint for so many love songs.
Yes.
And Broadway.
Yeah, I thought the exact same thing.
And this golden age romance sort of feel, this sort of singing in the rain, waiting at a cafe for somebody that you haven't seen in years, but you're hoping you're going to fall in love with. This sort of wistful, semi-nostalgic
Very
thing.
nostalgic.
It feels very nostalgic, and it feels, like you said, like so many love songs that have been sung after.
And I also love that it's called Dreams of Love, because that is the most appropriate name for the emotions that it evokes in me.
Really, yeah.
You know what I mean? It feels like somebody is sitting there daydreaming about their nostalgic romances.
And then it gets sort of fantastical, and then it resolves.
It's just gorgeous, man. It really is gorgeous. So to give credit where credit is due, this recording was done by a woman named Martha Goldstein, and it was recorded on an 1851 Erard Brothers piano.
Wow.
A piano that was built just 1 year after this composition was released, and by the very piano makers that Franz Liszt exclusively played on. So this is about as close as we can get to hearing how Franz Liszt would have heard it when he played it.
So cool.
Isn't that wicked?
Yeah.
I thought that was so cool. Now, I also want to play a quick clip of the same song with vocals, okay, which was created specifically for the 1975 film Lisztomania, where Roger Daltrey from The Who is singing. Just to give you an idea of what this piece might have sounded like in Franz's head when he wrote it, and then additionally, kind of how it ended up influencing how music is heard today. So I'm going to play a little clip of that.
Oh love, as long as love is young, as long as love is young. Oh love, as long as life shall last.
So there you go. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it invokes so many different feelings. It feels wildly nostalgic, wildly dreamlike. It reminds me a little bit of the song that Shalane and I danced to at our own wedding. I don't know.
I know, I can't explain it. It's just one of those melodies that you hear and you just go like, again, it was like I said, it's like you hear it and go, how do I know this? And you probably don't, but it's just like, you said it perfectly. It was like the blueprint of so many love songs that would come after it. And this was really the first time that it had been figured out.
It's like we speak in English, but this song is the Proto-Indo-European.
The other one, and this was actually Kat's call out, is she said it reminded her of Clair de Lune.
Yes.
Which is one of the most popular piano compositions of all time to this day.
And isn't that Chopin?
No, that is Brahms.
Brahms, okay.
So, and it's interesting too, because we're going to learn way later on in Franz's life that he actually knew Brahms as well. So almost undoubtedly, Brahms was influenced by Franz's compositions and then wrote Clair de Lune as a result of it. So it's one of those blueprints where you can hear it and just go, yeah, I can see how this
I can't help but copy this.
Exactly. It hit so hard.
It's like Leonardo's work with his crazy twisting poses that eventually became Baroque style paintings and romantic style paintings. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, and that glues into your mind as inspiration.
Totally. Or the Vitruvian Man and looking at Marvel Comics. And you're like, how does this feel familiar? Well, we've been looking at it for 500 years.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's the same
It's
kind
a
of
universal
thing.
Truth revealed in sort of a kind of a bare essence.
Yeah. Now, you might be surprised to hear this, but Franz's new idea of mixing poetry and music was met with pretty hefty skepticism by a huge portion of the old school composers, who sarcastically referred to it as, quote, the music of the future. So, like, sarcastically,
yeah.
Right? Oh, you play the music of the future? Oh, yeah, sure. Like, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Their sarcastic remarks would ultimately be proven to be not so sarcastic, however, as this would in fact become the future of music and would later lead to something known as the New German School of Music. This eventually led Franz to writing possibly his most famous music composition ever, Hungarian Rhapsody. And it's number 2 in C sharp minor, which I will play a clip of now.
Hungarian Rhapsody.
Yes.
Are we serious right now?
And yes, it is. And it being the direct influence for Bohemian Rhapsody for Queen is correct.
Okay.
And you're gonna hear why. And this is, I cannot play all of this because it's just too long. It's like 10 minutes long, but it is one of those where it's like, just like Bohemian Rhapsody, we think of the Scaramouche, but the beginning slow part, maybe we don't love. I do, but some people don't love as much. But it's the same type of feeling where you have to give it time. You gotta let it build up. So again, everybody, this is Hungarian Rhapsody number 2 in C sharp minor. First thoughts.
Damn. First thought was, it is in so many ways like Bohemian Rhapsody.
Right?
Because it feels less like there are movements and necessarily a plot, and more about the mind meandering.
Sure.
I was before the sort of second half where things got really intense and there was a huge crescendo, it very much reminded me of what it's like as, maybe some of you have experienced this as well, as being an immigrant thinking about a home country, right? You first start thinking about all of the fond things, the things that you miss, the foods, the culture, the people, the language, whatever. Then you start to think about the reasons why you left and the maybe the chaos or what's going on and what's so intense about that experience. And for him, it would be these floods that happened in Hungary, the fact that he doesn't feel like he's part of that culture. And then you start to once again sort of return to the piece, the reason why you're thinking about this in the first place, the things that you love about it.
Joy. I totally agree. For me, I think about it first starts out and it kind of feels like a Russian countryside, but it's obviously Hungary.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's I get these images of the peasants in the fields working,
nostalgia
amongst the sort of gloom of the entire thing. And then it gets to this point where it feels like, but there were also these great times where we were dancing and singing and having a good old time and we were running around and playing and screaming and blah, 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 blah. And it builds into this like joyous event, right?
Yeah.
Of it's not just doom and gloom. It is happiness as well. It can be both too.
Yeah.
And I will say for anybody out there that maybe listens to the song and especially the clip that I'm going to play and you go, how do I know this? One, it was used constantly in Tom and Jerry.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right.
They're like hitting each other with bats and running away from each other and chasing each other through the house because, Jerry did something to Tom that he can't stand anymore. He's going to get this friggin' mouse and he's chasing him around. That is all Hungarian Rhapsody, which means that this song basically led to more or less the invention of cartoon music. Looney Tunes.
Wild.
Think about that, because if you it almost feels like this, right? So in a weird way, Franz Liszt
And like
is
I said,
almost
Carnival.
Exactly, indirectly responsible for the idea of cartoon music as we kind of understand it, or at least understood it for a long time in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Insane, right?
So weird. That's so weird. And it's also so left field, I think, maybe from his original intention. But that's what I love about it. I was talking about this with Shalena. I'm working on my current biography, and there's some very important characters that end up being the parents of this particular subject. This guy has decomposed. He's dirt. He's literally dirt. But his idea, you don't have to know Franz Liszt to be affected by Franz Liszt.
Exactly.
You don't have to know anything about this. But you know Franz Liszt because you know Tom and Jerry. You know Franz Liszt because you've been to the carnival. You know Franz Liszt because you've had an experience. You know Franz Liszt because you like Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
It's such a rah-rah, sort of cringy, I'm going to put this on my bumper sticker sort of thing to say, but ideas live so long. Every word that we're saying was at some point created and developed. Every single thing that comes out of our mouth when we're trying to describe our own thoughts was made by another person, another generation. And with Franz Liszt, that's such an incredible example because just after we finished Leonardo da Vinci, where I think some people can understand origins, somebody like Franz Liszt comes along where maybe musicians know Franz Liszt, but most people don't.
Exactly.
And this shows up. The idea is still there. The gear is still turning. This song never stopped being made.
I know.
It's just made by different people now.
One of the biggest reasons I wanted to do Franz Liszt is that he's one of those people that it's, you probably don't know his name. A lot of people don't, and just probably skip over this series because they're just like, who's Franz Liszt? I don't care. They move on. But for all of our listeners that said, I'm going to give it a shot and go for it, and they got to this point, they're going to go, no shit. Not only did he basically lay the blueprints down for what I know to be ballads in modern times, but he also affected my childhood in a way that I never even understood. Every time that I watched these old cartoons.
County Fair or cartoons, that carnival feeling, that nostalgia.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, man. So, this is one of the reasons I love doing this show so much.
History is just so much more profound. The more and more that we get into it, it just becomes more and more profound. You forget how rich Earth is because you were born at a certain point and you'll die at a certain point. That doesn't mean that the world already has a history of its own when you first come into it. And
totally.
That's what's so great about Franz Liszt, and that's what's so great about the biographers. I love it.
I love it too. Now, for credit purposes, again, that piece was performed by Martha Goldstein, the last person that we heard who did the performance of Liebstrom. And again, that was on an 1851 Erard Brothers piano. So again,
it's great. So authentic.
It was literally what Franz would have been hearing when he played it himself. So again, that was Martha Goldstein. I believe she's passed away now, but a lot of her compositions you can actually find in the commons of Wikipedia. So if you want to hear these exact ones, they're there for you to listen to.
God bless Wikipedia, by the way.
Oh, it's the best, dude.
Can I just say?
I love it. And yeah, it's there. All of our sources are going to be cited as well on our website. So if you wanted to just go to our website, thebiographerspodcast.com, you can find the list there as well. So what's been going on this whole time with Franz's children? Well, Cosima had joined Blandine at her boarding school in Paris while Daniel was receiving private tutoring lessons with plans to enter the prestigious Lycée Bonaparte and being cared for by Anna Liszt. Since Franz's separation with Marie de Gault, none of the children had seen their mother, despite the fact that Marie was living in Paris the entire time.
That's so nice of her.
So they were living in the same city and she never came to see them.
Wow.
Again, that's why I said earlier, I was like, she's kind of a piece of shit. Anyway. But one afternoon in January of 1850, the two daughters decided to drop in on Marie unexpectedly, and apparently it was a very happy reunion. However, when Franz heard this news, he was absolutely livid, as he felt Marie had abandoned her children. Now, after hashing things over with Carolina, they decided to send Carolina's old governess, Madame Patersi, who is now 72 years old and retired. They sent her out to Paris to keep a close eye on the two girls and, most importantly, away from Marie. To put it mildly, the new governess was a dick. She was apparently so strict and severe with the kids that they were often reduced to weeping, to which the governess responded with one of her favorite mottos, quote, "Tears are just water."
Wow. What happened to this lady?
She's really hard.
She's 75. Chill out. Go make some cookies.
There's really no two ways about it. Franz may have loved his children, but he was not a good dad, which I was surprised to learn, given that he seemed to have had two pretty great parents.
Yeah.
I don't know what his deal was. So, yeah.
It's kind of like we talked about after reading Seth Rogen's book, which Seth Rogen, if you haven't read his book
it's really good.
It's really incredible. He talks about being around musicians versus being around actors. And he's like, actors are somewhat real because they have to be around real people.
Right.
PAs, people who do makeup, people who have regular jobs and have to go pick up the kids. Versus being a musician, being someone like Franz Liszt, you're kind of in your own bubble.
Yeah.
You're only surrounded by either your fans, the people who are making money off of you, or people who are helping you produce your music who are also making money off of you.
Yep.
And I think there's some of that effect happening to Franz at this point where he's surrounded by his own ego. Even if he didn't want to be, he is. Because there's nobody around Franz Liszt who doesn't absolutely love and adore him and are huge Franz Liszt fans or profit off of him wildly. So maybe there's some of that. There's just no way for this person to have a normal ego. It's kind of like what we talked about with Michael Jackson, where he was so famous that in one of his music videos, they had to green screen him walking down a street.
Yeah.
Because that just wasn't physically possible. And we're kind of getting there with Franz.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Really. It reminds me as well of Ozzy Osbourne's book. He will call himself out and say his ego was out of control. And I think that was pretty much what Franz was going through at this point as well.
Somewhat unavoidable and probably led to him being kind of a shitty parent.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. On the rare occasion that Franz saw his two daughters, they were prone to throwing fits and causing scenes, to which Franz wrote, quote, "These traits are among the most annoying in women, and especially in my daughters, for I find such a quality to be supremely unsympathetic. Tears are attractive only on festive occasions, which, thank God, are infrequent enough. This blubbering is a parody of those beautiful tears, and as such, I abhor it."
Jeez, dude.
Harsh, man.
Harsh.
Really harsh.
Real harsh coming from the guy who people literally applaud and throw their bras at your feet.
This is why I say, we never cover perfect people, so never get ready for that.
Yeah.
Right?
Never get ready for perfect people.
That's never going to happen. There's always going to be people that have black spots and black marks in just their personality in their life. So this is absolutely one of the most glaring ones for Franz, was that he was a pretty crappy dad too.
Yeah.
Now, the result of all this cruelty was a bit of suppressed emotions, as Blandine and Cosima would write to Franz and Carolina, basically telling them whatever they wanted to hear. But secretly, the two girls developed razor-sharp wits and a taste for fiery sarcasm. Because of Franz's unwillingness to be a father, the two girls would be held hostage under the care of their governess for 5 long years. Franz last saw his children in 1846 and would not see them again until 1853.
Great.
7 years later.
Wow.
So again, not good.
Not good.
Now, on the home front, back at the Altenburg, Carolina fought to obtain a legal divorce, but her husband didn't want to let it go, because if he did, he would no longer get that sweet inheritance money that Carolina was sitting on. In order to maintain her divorce case, a lot of things were kept secret. But one small detail was uncovered years after both of their deaths that would have been legally devastating. Since Carolina and Franz started living together, every few years, Carolina would take a vacation on her own to the little town of Karlovy Vary in modern-day Czech Republic. We have no historical records anywhere to prove this, but it's speculated and highly likely that Carolina was going off to give birth to her and Franz's illegitimate children.
So she's just been dumping the kids off in the middle of nowhere?
We don't really know.
Oh my God.
We don't really know.
That sucks so bad.
We don't know if they were given to orphanages or if they took care of them and then burned all the letters. We just don't know. We have no record of it. Now, many historians place the number at 3 children, but no communication with them or evidence of them has ever been found. So we will never really know.
Yeah. And to be honest, I am guessing there are a lot of people related to Franz Liszt living and breathing right now.
Correct.
Because it wasn't just his 2 main flings.
Correct. And I think I kind of say this towards the end here of this little snippet. Now, we don't even really know what happened to them, But one huge clue to support this idea comes from a state official who wrote at the time, quote, "On the last occasion that I saw Princess Carolina, her waistline struck me as highly suspicious, and all manner of fears rose up inside me, the realization of which would be truly sad." And that is literally all we know on this subject. But it does lead to the idea that it's very, very likely that Franz had dozens of illegitimate children all over Europe from the copious amounts of his sexual exploits. Whew, bit of a doozy on that one.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was expecting. It's kind of like the Marleys. Like, they're like, what are they, like 12 Marleys in music now because of Bob?
He had a lot, yeah. So we've talked about this before, but throughout Franz's life, he had an extreme weakness for infidelity. In mid-1853, a woman wrote to him requesting she be allowed to stay at the Altenburg and become his pupil. The woman's name was Agnes Klindworth, and when she arrived at the Altenburg, Franz was delighted to find an attractive, dignified, and well-read woman. As you probably guessed, Franz quickly took a liking to her. She just had a way about her that made him feel at ease, like he could tell her anything, and she would in turn listen for hours. For nearly 3 years, the two would engage in a secret affair at the Altenburg right under the nose of Carolina. A year into their relationship, in 1854, Agnes took a vacation to Hamburg for a few months, where she gave birth to a baby boy. Now, we don't know for certain if the boy was in fact the child of Franz Liszt, but the boy, who later went by George Street, ended up becoming a musician and composer. So,
yeah,
you can decide for yourself on that one.
Yeah.
A year later, in 1855, she gave birth to another boy, who she named Charles, and then left Weimar for good. Not a lot is known about Agnes Klindworth, as all of the letters she wrote to Franz were later destroyed. But remember a second ago when I said that she was a really great listener and would sit for hours listening to whatever Franz had to say? Well, as it turns out, Agnes was the daughter of a man named George Klindworth, who was, at the time, arguably the greatest intelligence gatherer and spy alive.
Oh.
At around age 17, Agnes had started getting into the family business, and right around the time she wrote to Franz asking to live at the Altenburg in Weimar, Weimar was in a state of political turmoil. Evidently, Agnes had been dispatched by her father to spy on Weimar's politicians and report back to the Russians.
What? Isn't Caroline his new girl?
Carolina.
Isn't she Russian?
No, not really.
Okay.
Like she was. So it's like
Czech.
Technically, she's from Kiev.
Okay.
Which is in modern day Ukraine, which at the time was kind of part of like Prussia/Russia. So like it's one of those weird ones. But
I thought that this news was going to get to her.
Well, it might have. I couldn't find any evidence of that. I would imagine it was kind of kept from her. But yeah, she was not necessarily a loyalist to the Russian government.
I see.
Let's put it that way. She had to, long story short, when she ended up having to kind of go live with Franz, she kind of had to flee because the Russian government didn't want that to happen.
Gotcha.
Again, long story short that I just didn't really include. But yeah. Now, not only was Franz's Altenburg school a great source of cover, but Franz himself was the perfect dairy cow of juicy intel, as he knew everyone in Weimar, including the political elite. Before meeting Franz, Agnes claimed that she had been married to a man named Captain Ernst Denis Street, but there is zero evidence that this man existed. So many believe it to be part of her cover story. Apparently, Franz did become aware that she was a spy within the first year of their meeting, but he didn't much care. So he continued his secret relationship with her for another 30 years.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh.
Now, there are a couple of long story short items that I'd like to address that were happening around this time. First, in 1855, Franz's two daughters, Cosima and Blandine, were being shipped off to Berlin to live with one of Franz's favorite pupils, Hans von Bülow, and his mother. This was because their old, nasty governess, Madame Petersi, had a massive tumor in her brain and was not long for this world.
Jeez.
Within a year of arriving in Berlin, Cosima ended up falling in love with Hans von Bülow, and the two were then married a year after that. Franz was initially hesitant about the marriage, but ultimately agreed despite reservations. Blandine also got married in 1857 to a French politician. Secondly, Franz was starting to get fed up with his longtime home in Weimar, as the citizens had started to get tired of his work and had even booed and hissed at the end of a recent opera he conducted called The Barber of Baghdad. And third, Carolina was still trying to obtain a divorce through the Catholic Church, but she was more or less free of her Protestant husband, who had managed to get a divorce through his church. Again, he was Protestant.
I see.
But in order for Carolina to get a divorce in the eyes of the Catholic Church, she would need to go to Rome and request a divorce from the Pope himself.
Wow.
But we'll get to that story in the next episode. So now we are in 1859, and in October of that year, just a few weeks after Franz turned 48 years old, his daughter, Cosima, dropped by for an unexpected visit. At first, Franz thought she had just come to say hello, but unfortunately, she came bearing bad news. A month earlier, Franz's son, Daniel, who had just turned 20 years old, had decided to pay his sisters a visit in Berlin, but soon after arriving, had fallen ill. For weeks, Cosima had been sitting at her brother's bedside, holding his hand and reading him stories, doing anything she could to help with his recovery. Doctors simply could not figure out what was wrong with him, and by late October, when Daniel started coughing up blood, they knew he had little time left. A few weeks after Cosima delivered the bad news, Franz arrived in Berlin and was nearly brought to tears when he saw his son emaciated and withering away. 4 days after he arrived, on December 15th of 1859, Daniel Liszt succumbed to his sickness and passed away.
Damn.
Franz was heartbroken, but Blandine and Cosima were beside themselves with grief, as they had grown extremely close while in the hands of their cruel governess. The death did strike Franz extremely hard, however, as he started to think more and more about his own eternal salvation, and in part, this event would help lead him down the path of eventually becoming an abbé for the Catholic Church. And I kind of teased at that at the very beginning of this whole series, and we'll get there in the next episode. Now, throughout this 12-year period of drama, innovation, and community living, Franz had befriended a relatively new but talented composer who had briefly used the Altenburg as a hideout before fleeing to Switzerland as a political criminal, and whose popularity had been steadily rising in the world of music. This new figure's gifts with musical composition would be matched only by his controversy, political extremism, and thought leadership regarding the anti-Semitic movement that would one day grip Germany and much of Europe. Though Franz's recently married daughter, Cosima, is only about 22 at this point in our story, she would later become this new figure's mistress and eventually his wife. If you're a fan of classical music or even music in general, you probably already know his name, which is, of course, Richard Wagner.
Oh.
And that's where we'll pick back up for part 5 of Franz Liszt.
Okay. Wow. We've covered so much, so many incredible innovations by Franz, as well as just incredible drama. It just seems kind of to surround him. I also think it's kind of funny that when his son died, he wasn't like, oh, I should be a better dad. He's like, but what about me? What happens when I die?
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily fair. I mean, he was, obviously, it was his... It's so funny, too, because I was telling Kat about all this stuff, and I was like, yeah, his only son died. And she goes, not really. And I was like, oh, that's true. Like, he actually technically does have other kids probably all over the place that he's like, I don't really care.
I bet you it has to be over 30.
It has to be.
It has to be over 30, at least.
It has to be.
I mean, we're talking, at some point, there was 30 concerts a month, and at least half of those, he was boning somebody.
Yeah. He had
at
women
least half of
constantly
those
in and out
would
of his
result
bed.
in a pregnancy if things were done conventionally.
Right.
So we're looking at like 50, 60, maybe more.
Yes. I
like
I
the
don't think
Genghis Khan sort of level of lineage.
I think you're pretty right on. Yes. So, but again, it was in his world of, I hate to say it this way, but the children he considered his children.
Yeah.
Right. That were the most legitimate or whatever.
The impact was pretty massive.
His only, quote unquote, only son had died. So he was very, very upset about it. And even though he was a fairly distant father, it was the one who was going to carry on his name in theory.
Yeah.
Right. So again, he was very upset about it, but it was, yes, it did make him get to this point of, maybe that was the wrong way to say it. It wasn't just him being like, oh, my son died. What'll happen to me when I die? It was mostly like this, like grief can do to you, which was, have I been focusing on the wrong things here?
Yeah.
Right? Of him going, man, I've been so consumed with my own stuff and my own fame and my own everything that I neglected my son, and now he's gone, and what happened to him? Am I going to see him again? And those thoughts get you to that point of going, man, maybe I got to shape up here, because I just don't know that I can continue down this road, because I just can't stop thinking about this stuff. And maybe I need to be more devoted to the God that I believe in, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So again, I would imagine that's probably where it went. I don't think it was that egotistical, but yeah, we'll get into the next episode, but he falls into a pretty big...
That's a much better way to put it.
Pit of depression for quite a while. There's a really long period of time where even through the research that I've done and the books that I've read, it talks about like this was the great period of sadness for Franz Liszt.
I see.
And we're going to get into some other stuff in the next episode that's also sad, but it was rough, man. It wasn't just, oh man, I better get myself into shape because I want to go to heaven. It was like, it was depressing.
Yeah, this was a wake-up call.
Yeah, I think so. Now, don't get too excited about that or whatever, because it's still going to be a fun story as we go along with Franz Liszt's life here. It's still pretty crazy and pretty funny, but yes, that's where we'll pick it up for next time. And we covered, this was the longest stretch of his life that we've covered so far. This was like 15 years of his life in this one episode.
Sounds about.
Well, I guess we're going to wrap it up there. So again, for anybody that is enjoying the show so far, either this series or just any of the other series that we've done, again, any support that you can give us would be greatly appreciated. That's going to be patreon.com/thebiographers. Also, keep an eye out for our Kickstarter, which we should be getting going really in the next week or so here. That's going to be kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers. You can also find us on social media. That's going to be TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. All of them are going to be at The Biographers, except for Instagram, which is at the.biographers. And then lastly, any questions, comments, corrections, right? Not lastly, almost lastly. Questions, comments, corrections, you can send us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. And then lastly, go check out Akiva's website, Metalwork by Meola, MEOLA.com, for all of your chef's knives and metalworking needs. You can use the code biographers at checkout to get 10% off your order. Anything else you want to add to that?
Nah, man. I think we covered it.
Cool. Well, that's going to do it. Again, everybody, thanks for listening. And remember, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.